We are discussing this theme of imperialism's war on multipolarity just when the war that the US has instigated against Russia over Ukraine is grinding on, raising prospects of famine, inflation, fuel shortages, and even possibly nuclear war in a wider conflagration. Meanwhile, the US president continues to make one irresponsible and dangerous remark after another, indicating that the United States, perhaps because it is desperate, perhaps because it is rudderless, might be going for some sort of maximalist aims, which can only spell a danger and destruction for the world. And this includes the Biden administration making threatening remarks to China, threatening a similar scenario of a war against China over Taiwan this time, on the model of the Ukraine conflict. So these are clearly dangerous times, these are clearly difficult times, and it is important perhaps to begin with some basics. What is multipolarity and why should we care about it? Well, at a very minimum, it refers to the fact that today around the world, productive power and along with it all the other forms of power have spread sufficiently widely to essentially displace the West and the United States from their previous centrality to the world order. And I'd like to mention that I'm particularly partial to Hugo Chavez's preference for the term pluripolarity, indicating that these a larger number of poles of power around the world also are distinct. They have distinct traditions, they have distinct ways of managing their economy, distinct institutions through which to do this, distinctive needs and desires and aspirations. So why is it then that we should defend this sort of multipolarity or pluripolarity? I can think of at least three reasons. The first and foremost, perhaps the most important, is that it undermines imperialism. It has historically done so. And today it is undermining a particularly dangerous and desperate US imperialism. The mainstream press and the mainstream scholarship only began paying attention to multipolarity in the 2010s. But if you think about it, multipolarity, that is to say there being multiple poles of productive power, is more than a century old. It goes back at least to the late 19th century when the first challengers emerged to challenge the dominance of the industrial and imperial dominance of Britain over the world. And all of these challenges actually were based on organizing economies in a state-directed fashion, in a protectionist fashion. I don't want to use the word protectionist in a bad way, but in a way that implies managing trade intelligently to ensure high levels of economic activity, high levels of technological advance, and so on. This was the way in which these challenges emerged then and continue emerging today. So precisely because the world had already become multipolar in the late 19th century, that the United States has always failed in its efforts to try to unite a world under capitalism and under its domination. Because of course, no sooner had these original challenges emerged, you also, starting in 1917, had the Soviet Union, and in 1949, China, pursuing their own forms of development and therefore enhancing multipolarity. So in that sense, the United States essentially was constrained in its attempt to dominate the world. And after the demise of the Soviet Union and the end of communism in Eastern Europe, it briefly looked as though the United States would have its way. It would establish its dominion, in a sense, over the world. But by the new century, it was very clear that this was not possible. The United States, on the one hand, in its attempt to dominate the world, had become too weak economically. And on the other hand, the Soviet Union may have gone, but Russia was being stabilized, and China in particular was making huge strides in its socialist economic development. And so this has continued the onward march of multipolarity. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that multipolarity is all about development. Free markets, free trade, free market globalization, and free market US hegemony do not and have never produced development. They have only offered the rest of the world subordination to imperialism. It's only state-managed and directed development that subordinates markets to the public purpose, to social ends that have ensure development. And this has become clear in the new century and to more and more people. Countries around the world, in Latin America, in Africa, and elsewhere, are beginning to realize that free market, free trade, neoliberal way is not going to give them development. They have to try something else. And the final very brief reason is that multipolarity, by spreading productive and along with it military power around the world, is the only force capable of deterring, if possible, and preventing the United States from waging its unending wars that it has kept up since the demise of the Soviet Union. So I think for all these reasons, multipolarity is very critical.